This broadcast is made possible by conditions and circumstances beyond our control, and by the generosity of viewers just like you. Learn more at www.patreon.com/wearebeloved. Thank you for watching.
Well, I did the reading tonight. It went pretty well, and I was trying to get a recording of it so that those of you who wanted to see it afterward, because I know there were a few, would be able to see it. And I went to go share a story on Instagram, and guess what happened? The whole video just disappeared. So I'm doing another reading for those of you who want to see it afterward, and so you'll be seeing this posted. So a little background, the journal that this piece was published in is called FEMSPEC, and FEMSPEC stands for the Feminist Journal of Speculative Fiction. And this is an interdisciplinary journal dedicated to challenging gender in science fiction, fantasy, magical realism, surrealism, myth, folklore, and other supernatural genres. So my story is called I Am ERIKA. Now, there's a couple of little warnings here. This is a dystopian future that deals with a transgender megastar, a virus. Oh yes, it was written before the pandemic, so if that's too much for you, I completely understand, but there's a virus. But there's also a transgender megastar, so hopefully that makes it okay. And it takes place in this sort of dystopia, like I said. So without further ado, we'll just dive right in. You may notice I'm talking a little fast. Well, the story runs about 20 minutes as a read, and this app on my phone only gives me 20 minutes of recording. So let's just go for it. Here we go. All right. I Am ERIKA. When Kafka wrote that shit, it wasn't real. Okay, so they don't usually turn you into a giant bug, since being a giant bug means that you're left with not much of a mind at all. You can't breathe through your joints, and you certainly don't have much ability to get on your phone so you can pay them the monthly ransom. And it's usually not airborne these days. The dregs of Russian society, the cartels, and the corrupt pharmaceutics usually behind this shit did figure out early on that collapsing the economies of entire mid-sized Midwestern cities kind of destroyed their ability to collect ransom out of the places they infected. So they got subtler and started making their bugs harder to get, just a little. And you might say they started making them just a little bit more personal. Me, they just turned me into a boy. Back into a boy. I don't know how they got my original DNA or my original epigenetic imprints, but they obviously got them somewhere. Maybe they got them from the sperm I had stored when I started transition. I don't know. Maybe they paid off a crooked nurse at the gender clinic or hacked one of their bots for that matter. Or, now that I think of it, well, you'll know soon enough. Anyway, I think the infection and the 3-week descent back into the timid wreck of a male that I once was started at the hotel in Denver. That might not have been it, but that was when the red-haired kid yelled the slur and threw the cup of something in my face. 3 years of multi-stage transition work at the genetic level undone by a personalized virus in under a month. Just like that. I'd caught the kid by the arm and asked him why he did it. And he looked more scared and guilty than anything. I realized right then that he'd been told to do it. Maybe paid to do it. Who was it that paid him, or who was it that told him it was just a reality show dare that would make him famous for 15 minutes in some Southeast Asian country? Whoever it was that probably told him the only thing in the cup was water, or whoever it was that threatened to do something to him or his family if he didn't do it, I'll never know. By the time I'd asked him who, he'd already broken my grip and run, and the lobby was crowded. A lot of the crowd had been there to try to get a glimpse of me, and they were all tripping over each other in the confusion and crashing into furniture after it happened. I didn't bother following the kid in that mess, and part of me was still in shock. Even if I'd caught the character who gave him the assignment, what would it have mattered? Even if I'd called the police, what would it have mattered? When I got up to my suite that night, I cried. Not that that was unusual. I don't know when I'd started to name the discomfort initially, but it had been wearing on me for some time. When had bringing forth the beautiful woman inside me turned into having to be the most beautiful, the only beautiful? The shift had been subtle, imperceptible, but there it was. It had happened. Long after I'd owned the discomfort, I got up the courage to talk about it, but Quinny and the other crew coached me not to talk about it on stage. Don't even try the ironic bit, they'd said. The subtle shift of context from being beautiful to being the most and only is one that capitalism doesn't want us to think about. Start feeling that difference, start fingering at that distinction, and you'd better distract yourself, or drink yourself, or coke yourself. Funny that the people who had provided all the coke back in the bad old days might have been the very ones who got me in Denver. Maybe this was their way of getting back at me for finally kicking that goddamn habit cold turkey and telling 50 million adoring fans that they could shake their way out of it and actually face their existential crises too. Facing existential crises head on and making them the content of your performances when you're supposed to be selling makeup and bottled water doesn't exactly help the bottom line for the people behind the makeup and the bottled water out there. Neither does the lamenting in front of 380 million viewers that, and I quote, "The freedom to be a gender-fearless sapiosexual is wonderful, and thank you, Caitlin and Jenna and Natalie and the rest of you way showers, too many to mention." But also, under the steely gaze of late-stage capitalism, transgender has just become another thing to colonize and weaponize as a means of convincing people they're not enough. Never, never, never enough, and that they need. Sorry, transgender. It's not your fault. It's what happens to everything. Excuse me. Maybe Denver was these people's way of getting back at me for my getting back at them for making the most meaningful choice of my life, just another cheap commodity to sell to the highest bidder. Yeah, when I went off the rails at that one show last year in Palm Springs, invited that heckler on stage and let him talk Leviticus at me for 3 whole minutes before letting him know that trans isn't the problem, but that grasping for power as a reaction to scarcity is the problem, and about the most un-Jesus thing anybody could do. I might have pissed off the Chinese sponsors a bit. It probably freaked them out when my words from that performance apparently showed up on 20,000 separate protest signs held by kids who decided to make a mess on Wall Street. The Chinese don't even pretend to be communist anymore, but they still do the censorship thing. Funny how they sponsored me right up until the speculation started about what the event in Denver probably meant for my career, while at the same time, they did everything in their power to make sure the mainland never saw me. Palm Springs hadn't fazed them, but the Denver detransition had. Go figure. Well then, Salt Lake City, next stop on the tour. It was 3 days after Denver when I started to notice subtle changes in my facial structure in the mirror that I could not deny. I stood there pulling away from that ridiculously garish mirror, only long enough to see that someone had slipped a folded note under the front door of the suite. There was nothing on the note but a URL. I didn't dare. I still wanted to deny what I was seeing in the mirror, so I went back to the bathroom so I could stare more, this time with the hot water running, so I could use the steam to pretend to myself that it was heat and not actually tears of sadness and terror that were wetting my face. I put the URL in my purse into the show. Just the usual show. No more antics than usual. 4 days of R&R in Atlanta, after the spa, mostly running around 5 Points, trying to show all the swarming queer kids they could face their existential crises too. The struggle is the content, you know, first said by one of the way showers when she had like 40 subscribers on YouTube when YouTube was a thing, way back. But not that struggle, said Quinny, my co-producer, and still sometimes Leslie lover. Not that struggle. Did you get hit by something, she asked me on the last night in Atlanta before we flew out to Sarasota to do the show at the new outdoor floodline amphitheater with half its support pylons in the water. All these northbound refugees, excited to show our entourage they could roll up their sleeves, put aside past differences, and build new towns on their own. To hell with the promised subsidies and promised insurance that hadn't materialized for what, 5 years now? Well, Quinny said I couldn't go out looking like this, and good thing I hadn't realized my old bald spot had started to return. If I'd known before the show, I might have agreed with her. But I put on my makeup, went out, and I never did tell her about Denver. Still, some of that old shame lurking around, I guess. In Sarasota, I found another note with the same URL when I got back from the show, exhausted and ready to cry as usual. There might be fingerprints all over it, but again, what good would the police do? What good would a detective do? I suppose my candy ass is rich enough to buy a PI all loaded up with specialized AI, but half the time those creeps just run you in circles, eating up all your money while taking cash from the very people you're trying to catch. I've heard stories. No, I'm just going to go online and finally look. Of course, the URL was just a mask, a redirect to something else with an RU extension, which doesn't mean anything. They might only want you to think they're operating out of the remnants of some vintage Putin-era hacker farm on the edge of Moscow, when really they're in India or Bolivia or some nameless business park right down the road. Quinny wants to handle it. I have too much on my mind already, but I tell her no. This is mine. My karma, my dharma. I got a deal. The scam was pretty standard stuff. I can't pretend I didn't once smile at imagining something like this happening to me when I first started to get big. Really big. Of course, when I'd imagined it, it had all been before I'd imagined getting this big. No, that's not totally true. I'd imagined getting this big, and I'd imagined this kind of scenario long before I'd had any following at all. It had all been grandiose fantasy back then, and I'd known it. Back then, I didn't really share it with myself. I mean, the fantasy had been a kind of thing that my inner child made sure that my inner parent didn't know about, let alone the 50 followers that I had managed to gather in my first year of streaming. The fantasy had been entertaining back then, just another form of masturbation for a bored crossdresser, too smart for her own good, and too smart for anything resembling a real job. In the fantasy, I'd go out a hero, take a stand. Now, I was just scared. The whole screen flashing, red, white, red. Well, the flashing screen is clear, a weird relief in a way. All they want is money. Of course, it's all that matters to these cretins. They could be doubling the collective brainpower of humanity, building starships, rebuilding the aquifers under Central Africa, China, and the Great Plains. They're damn smart enough to bring back the elephant and restore the whole Amazon from shreds of DNA stuck in amber. But I guess it takes less imagination and less trouble for the powers that be to make viruses that cripple people and hold their lives at ransom. Easier to make the genius stupid and dangle his old brains in front of him. Easier to make some poor teenager so sensitive to sunlight they can't go outside. And the ones who can't pay? Let me tell you something, dear. America ain't any nicer to her lepers than the ancient Israelites were to theirs. I know you've got no lepers in your town. Ever been out to Portland, San Francisco, Eugene, Grants Pass? How about Klamath Falls or Medford? They've got all the lepers you sent them. Oregon and California figured out how to keep paying out the disability checks the federales forgot about 20 years ago. I don't know, something to do with state IOUs that everybody knows will never get paid back to anyone, but the federales look the other way while local businesses use them like real tax-free money because nobody else wants the lepers. Personally, I love the IOUs. Who says they're not real money? That's a scam I can actually get behind. Out there, they've got doctors and clinics curing people as fast as they can. Occasionally, the doctors figure their way past all the decoy strands and self-rewriting hooks, and somebody gets a new lease on life. Usually, the patient is never the same. Almost, but not quite. The docs just can't keep up with the scammers. Well, I do have the money to pay, US gringo dollars, not state of Jefferson IOUs, backed only by an open heart chakra somewhere on the West Coast. Maybe if I pay, they give me the restorative virus, or maybe not. Maybe they give me something worse. Maybe I should feel lucky they're just turning me back into the boy I was. Maybe they're not just turning me back. Maybe this is the first stage of... No, I can't go there. The day the rumors got out was the day I finally got it up to call my home clinic, the same day half of my hair ended up in the shower drain, the same day my old black 5 o'clock shadow returned with a vengeance, and the fat in my buttocks somehow found its way to my belly overnight. Of course, the clinic would have the genetic and epigenetic signatures for each and every stage of my transition, both digital backups of it and stored samples, or they actually didn't. The records had been scrambled, all the client records had, and the power to that particular bank of freezers had gone out, and the backup power. Then it became clear from the recording of my call and the video from my own camera of me making the call, getting posted all over the place, that somebody had intercepted. Somebody on crew, anybody on crew. No, only Quinny had the keys, and only Quinny knew what clinic was holding my genetics and which bank of freezers. Only Quinny had the password to this device, and it's Cam. Fuck you, Quinny. How much did they pay you? What did they offer you? Yes, Quinny, the camera is still on and streaming live. 86 million viewers seeing this. Yes, they're seeing me as a balding 50-year-old man who will probably never be fixed and who will probably end up a glitch clown if she tried. Yes, they're all seeing me as a 50-year-old balding man firing you. Goodbye, Brutus, goodbye. By the end of the day, I bet we'll hit 2 billion views. The struggle is the content, bitch. I love this body for the miracle of evolution that it is. I love it for the 14 billion years of love that went into it. The hairline and the waist and buttocks are all wrong, though, and the scammers' genetic decoys and barbs probably mean they'll never be right again. Unless I pay. According to some who claim to be experts, statistics do show that you get it all back if you pay most of the time. Supposedly, they have to show the odds are ever in your favor, so you'll bother to pay. An agreement among thieves, I suppose, and it does make sense. Who knows whose statistics the experts are quoting, though? The science is all bought and paid for these days, pretty much all of it, except the physics. Smart girls like me know it's not really science if it's bought and paid for. You hear that, my viewers? Yes, the camera is still live. Science that's bought and paid for isn't really science. I know enough of you are actually listening well enough to be inspired enough by that statement to do something that makes the news. Seriously, though, this is where the story gets weird. The hotel maid bursts in just as I'm wrapping this latest televised tirade. I guess after I fired her and ordered her out of the suite, Quinny didn't bother hanging the do not disturb thingy on the door. Anyway, the poor maid jumps back in surprise. Not a bot, but a real girl, though you wouldn't know it from looking at her. She's got to be a fucking leper. Changing sheets and refilling in a swanky hotel, a job a bot would be doing if it weren't for some liberal politician in the Florida State House who figured if you're not willing to give them UBI, at least give them some goddamn jobs. I hope my crew has treated you well, is all I can say to her. God damn, am I this much of a fucking narcissist? Self-compassion, girl, it's been a hard few weeks. That's when I fell apart. The maid nodded yes, not like she'd admit it to anybody on my crew, or not like she would admit it if anybody on my crew had been shitty to her. I once knew that kind of timid. I know from experience exactly how it behaves. Now I just lost it. I hugged the poor little maid and cried my fucking eyeballs out with her in my arms for I don't know how long. That's when I made up my mind. I told the maid, whose name was Sam, short for Samantha, she could quit this damn job and join the circus if she liked. The camera was still live with all this going on. I hate this fucking body, I said to the camera. The last time I had this body, I hid from cameras. I couldn't even bring myself to snap a selfie back then. But I'm not paying, bitches, even though I can buy out all your secret labs and your whole fucking hacker farm. And we're continuing the tour, just like this. The boy bod I fucking hate, the leper and all, not even makeup. I am ERIKA, I am woman, hear me roar. And that's exactly what we did. The next night we hit London right after deplaning at Heathrow, right after having been up all night, right after trying to get through streets full of rioters, trying to get a peek at what my face had become. We did the show, By the end of the week, the recording hit 4 billion unique views when all the different platforms were accounted for. 4 billion! Double my record from just days before, but so much more important than that. So much more important than my fucking oversized ego. Literally half the human race, including a huge number in China, thanks to someone who had jammed the censor algorithms beyond any hope of repair. Probably every human being with a device capable of rolling video saw the T-girl with the old man bod shaking hands with the leper on stage, standing for something. I don't know exactly what, but something. Something remembered, something needed, something that mattered, something that's starting to smell a lot like burning. Everywhere. Even in China. Thank you.
This broadcast is made possible by conditions and circumstances beyond our control. And by the generosity of viewers just like you. Learn more at www.patreon.com/wearebeloved. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like this video, and smash that subscribe button on your way out the door.